Hello, and welcome to the third reading diary for Infinite Jest on my channel. And now with a new setup and a little bit of a change in feelings on the book over the last month or so that I've been reading. As I discovered recently, I think I will almost certainly finish Infinite Jest earlier than I originally planned and scheduled for it to, which is a good thing for me, of course. But not only this, I won't have to be spending every day of every weekend reading this for the next couple of months just to be able to finish it. I should not only be able to finish it, a few weeks early, I'll be able to get through it with a little bit less reading time each day than I've been putting in over the last few months, which is exciting. So I will still follow my pre-planned schedule for these diaries. I have considered this and wondered if it would be worth trying to switch around my video schedule a little bit, but given how many of the videos over the next couple of months, the next few months really are already recorded and in the editing booth, so to speak, I figure it won't be worth it. So today I cover chapters 23 through 26 of the book. I'm now about 2/3 of the way through it, I believe 64% if you do the technical calculations, including the endnotes that I have read so far. And in a little over a month, I'll be doing the fourth not Wheel of Time Diary, that's not the series, Infinite Jest Diary, where I'll be talking about chapter 27, the longest chapter of the book, and then a month or little more than a month after that, in late September, will be the diary for chapter 28, the final chapter of the book, almost as long as chapter 27 is. But I did hint at the beginning of this episode that I have a little bit of a change of heart on the book so far. That's not to say that I'm not enjoying it anymore, because that's not true. There are still a lot of moments that I am enjoying, but it's not hitting as hard as it was for those first, early weeks essentially of reading. Even the last diary had a lot of really great, memorable content that when I was talking about it, I was like, this stuff was cool. This month, this diary, this time around, I would say the amount of that content is a little bit less, will say. It's like I said, it's not because I'm disliking the book, not because it's bad or anything of those sorts, but mostly just that it's had a lot of content that I haven't been as actively interested in. It's had a little bit of a harder time keeping my focus when I am reading, and maybe part of that is because I've been overly exhausted from work the last couple of weeks. I don't know. I just know that the last couple chapters haven't been my favorite. The couple chapters before that were pretty good, though. A lot of the material of Infinite Jest as a whole, as my experience so far reading the first 26 chapters of the book, the first 2/3 of the book, is that a lot of the material is tangential. That is basically an identity character trait of the book, but what scenes are relevant, unfortunately, still aren't always 100% detail-oriented events that you have to remember. They're more relevant in terms of the characters and like some specific events, but a lot of it is just like getting you through a thing as opposed to an event. If that makes any sense at all, it probably doesn't, but I'm trying my best to explain here. As a result, my experience with the book over this last month of reading these last few chapters, these recent few chapters, as a result of this, a lot of the developments don't feel like they have as much weight as I want them to, or as they should, even when scenes are a little bit more interesting and intriguing and do have my attention a little bit better. Rarely do any of these feel like Infinite Jest is actively going anywhere, so by the time we're 2/3 through the book, I feel like there should be a little bit more cohesion in how things are coming together. Sure, plot lines are coming together, there are references that are making some of the points and some of the ideas come together a little bit, but it's not like fully clicking yet, and I want it to be clicking. It's 2/3 of the way through the book, but I still have a few hundred pages left. I feel like we need to get somewhere quickly because I feel like I'm grinding gears at this point. Unfortunately, chapters 25 and 26, the last couple chapters that I read over the last couple of weekends, were really exhausting to read just because of how drawn out Infinite Jest has become in this regard that I've kind of just talked about for me personally anyway. But chapter 26, fortunately, on that end, even though these couple chapters were drawn out, did have some pretty cool stuff going for it. It did end with something that brought my enthusiasm back up a little bit. So I'm not hopeless moving into these last couple months, reading these last couple chapters. But man, I hope these last couple chapters have a little bit more going on. Like I said, my reading this month overall, as a spoiler-free note, has basically just been about introducing a couple new characters within the previously established Ennet House plotline, and I'm hoping this is the end of the truly new material for the book, because it is 2/3 through the book, and I hope it's where past material starts coming together, like I've said a couple times up to this point. But I also said in the last diary that I felt like I was on the verge of things clicking. I'm basically saying the same thing here. I feel like I'm still on that verge, still on the edge, still about to jump into a plot where things are actually starting to come together a little bit more. I know Infinite Jest isn't about the plot. People have warned me this fact, but I still want something to come together a little bit more than it has been, so it's just kind of grinding my gears a little bit. If David Foster Wallace, if he spends chapter 27, this entire 190-page chapter, continuing to just dribble out these long-winded scenes that don't feel like they're really going anywhere, I'm probably going to start to get really irritated by the next one of these diaries. Things get dicey when all of my favorite moments from the book, as basically all of my favorite moments from Infinite Jest are from the first 1/3 of the book, but maybe even from before the first 1/3 of it, as like these scenes that I recall most clearly are from the first like 10 chapters, first like 120, 150, maybe 200 pages of the book. So yeah, that's not necessarily looking good for Infinite Jest at this point. I'm still enjoying it, still going to continue it and finish it, but it isn't really like, I'm not loving it right now the way that I was loving it the last few of these diaries. But with all that being said, I think I've done enough rambling and meaningless talking over the course of this spoiler-free-ish type of segment. Let's talk a little bit more about spoilers, about what happened in my reading over chapters 23 through 26. Now, much like I did in the last one of these diaries, I have my notes split out between the chapters to make my ramblings a little bit more coherent and a little bit more sensical and a little bit more linear, so I hope that helps on the listening end for you, the viewer. Let's start off with what I read in chapter 23. Some of the big events, so to speak, that were happening in this chapter was the actual Independence Day party at Enfield Tennis Academy. That was the main thing that was going on, the through line of chapter 23. You got material that includes referencing a traditional yearly viewing of one of Mario's films, so that's what's going on at this party, and mentions that they do this yearly at the Academy. It uses Mario's film as a sort of commentary and a satire on the politics of Onan, so the whole North American group of nations within the book. It also seems that this film is based a little bit on one of Mario's father's films, so James Oren, Incandenza, J.O.'s, that's how I'm going to refer to him over the course of the video and the next couple diaries as well if I have to. This film of Mario's that's being showed here seems to be based on one of J.O.'s films of a similar style, so that's an interesting thing to be, displaying one of these works by Mario, because he's not really built to be a tennis player, if you know about his, the way that he's built. But I'm pretty sure we got a little bit more detail on over these chapters. I don't remember where it would have been, but there was somewhere in here that I think referenced a little bit more specifically how he was built and how that affects his lifestyle. Like I said, I don't remember exactly where it was, but I feel like that was in my reading over the last month, and that was interesting stuff, even though it doesn't really fit in with like the plot anywhere, so to speak. Anyway, not all of the material from the Independence Day party hit, but it was definitely intriguing nonetheless. It was mostly just interesting to get a nice, succinct background, so to speak, on, Onan and the politics of this area, even if it may be a little bit biased because of being from Mario's perspective and, being played at an academy for high school and even middle school age kids. So that's an interesting idea. Some of the material of the Independence Day party here was broken up by therapy sorts of sessions, you could say, featuring students sneaking into the weight room sauna even during the film and the party portion of the chapter. And there's a character in there, I forget his name off the top of my head. He was referenced just in chapter 26 at one point, and I still forget the name off the top of my head. There is a character here who basically talks with the students here, acts as a sort of therapist in some way, talks with them about their fears, anxieties, the solutions for them on these regards. Some of this material was a little bit strange, but I found it a little bit amusing as it was in there. But chapter 23, as most of the chapters of the book, at least in, this portion of it, also had a little bit more to do with Meredith and Steepley. We got more of that plot line, especially as far as the background on the entertainment was concerned. The entertainment, which I'm pretty certain is just Infinite Jest, the ultimate final film produced by James Oren and Cadenza. I don't think it's ever been confirmed anywhere in the book up to this point that is the case, but I feel like that just kind of has to be it. I'm kind of putting things together. I feel like that has to be the thing, especially since that's the title of the book. So, there's always that to it. But here in particular, in this plot line in chapter 23, we get arguments starting between the two of these characters about AFR and BSS, so the two agencies that these two characters work for, their stance on the entertainment, and not just on the entertainment itself, but also on the distribution of it, the way that the AFR seems to be distributing it pretty freely. We also see some of these arguments take them to further arguments on the ideas of will and desire as it pertains to nations, the way that societal differences play in how people make decisions and how they make decisions based on other people's desires and will. We get a little bit of an interesting dichotomy between Meredith and Steepley on this front, which I enjoyed reading about. We also got a little bit of a mention somewhere in chapter 23 as a side note, a mention of Mario's distress at Joelle's disappearance. Of course, we know from earlier in the book that Joelle is Madame Psychosis and therefore hosted that one radio show that Mario really likes to listen to. And the fact that her disappearance is, well, unexplained, and it's not even really mentioned by the producers of the show. We know Madame Psychosis is at Enid House, that is Joelle, but nobody else does. So it's interesting to get a little bit more explicit mention of this as well within the chapter. We will come back to this a little bit later with some of my sort of crackhead theories. But moving on to chapter 24, there's a little bit less to actively talk about in this one. The ETA plot line was composed mostly of the ordering of drills for students, the way that the tennis students kind of go through their drills, which I found super engaging for some reason. I found most of the ETA material, especially the tennis specific material of Infinite Jest, really good, really engaging. It's really drawn me in, and I have been largely satisfied by it, all things considered. And within this segment as well, within the drills, we also got a little bit from Stitt, one of the coaches, speech at the end, which was a little long-winded but similarly engrossing as the drills itself, getting an idea into the mindset and the daily life of some of the students at the tennis academy, the tidbits of life advice here and there, and like psychophilosophy in these moments are just really good within the book, and this moment in chapter 24 was no different. But the real shining material in chapter 24, for me at least, was the backstory and history of Don Gately at Enid House. We read about how he came to his sobriety, we read about how his early life and career of sorts at Enid House. We read about his other job cleaning at another place and the way that he balances that job with doing the work at Enid House. We read about some counseling type of stuff with other Enid residents that Gately and other people perform with the other residents. I think the examples here and elsewhere in the book are usually with Joelle, so discussions between Joelle and Gately together talking about stuff, which are little segments are short, but I find them really engaging as well. And then, of course, chapter 24 also had continued arguments between Meredith and Steepley, which was equally entertaining and on similar lines of subject as those in chapter 23. So even though I did speak in the spoiler-free section of this video a little bit more critically of Infinite Jest, chapters 23 through 24 were really good. They have been comparable to the large average of quality throughout the entire book for me. It's chapters 25 and 26 that I think are a little long-winded and just didn't really push things forward enough. The end of chapter 26 did, but not really enough to make up for 80 whole pages of a chapter. So I'm worried about these last couple of chapters, not gonna lie, but that's besides the point. Let's talk a little bit about chapter 25, some of the things that happened in there. Of course, a little bit more with Marith and Steeply having more discussion. You get little bits and pieces of this throughout the entire chapter in smaller portions. They start talking a little bit more about the Infinite Jest master copy, or rather the master copy of the entertainment, which, like I said, I can be reasonably certain is just Infinite Jest. They also question each other about the desire that they have about viewing the entertainment themselves, and if they have any morbid curiosity for it on that front. They discuss the methods that some of their agencies have been trying to take to allow people to view it and explain what it was, and, you know, getting to a very specific point of the film where they stop being able to recollect it. Like, the film just completely takes over the brain, makes you unable to really think or act upon literally anything else besides just the desire to want to watch more of the film, and that's all it does. So little bit of it's not supernatural really, like, all things considered. I don't think supernatural would be the right term, but it has a supernatural air to it. The fact that you could have somebody, like, even being distracted by other stuff, like, the entire time they're trying to watch something, but as soon as they get to a certain point of the film, they just, like, blank out, their brain's gone. Even when the film is taken away from them, they're, like, in a catatonic sort of state where all they want to do is watch the film. So you get a little bit of explanations on this front that I found, you know, really, really interesting. You know, the type of condition that the viewers who watch Infinite Jest end up, you know, putting themselves in, or rather are ended up in because of the film. It makes you wonder, or at least it makes me wonder, maybe the film in its final version, as James Oren, as J.O., was putting the film together, is why he went crazy and stuck his head in a microwave and, you know, cooked himself to death. Like, maybe part of this was because of Infinite Jest, but you would also think that he would be, you know, stuck in the loop of wanting to watch Infinite Jest until the end of his days, similar to the way that it does for other viewers. But maybe it doesn't affect him the same way because he's the creator. Who really knows? I certainly do not. That's just a random idea I had. But there were a couple other segments of chapter 25, including a long section from Hal at you know, his uncle's and mom's office, with the moms talking with some of the girls of ETA about men taking advantage of them and how to deal with that situation and how to report it, you know, that kind of stuff. And then in the other office with Charles Tavis, is that his name, Charles Tavis? The uncle, Hal's uncle, talking with a new entry girl who was just dropped on the sidewalk at ETA by her parents, basically. You get a little bit of this stuff there. You get Hal commenting, or at least noting, the color of blue and whatever everywhere within this area for some reason. Not gonna lie, I kind of hated this section. Like, there wasn't enough for me to, like, really loathe it, but I didn't really enjoy it either. Insight on the moms and Charles Tavis was a little bit interesting, but I think this section definitely ran way too long. There was also a section on Ken, Erdetti, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, I'm sorry, who gets in hot water with another NA member within Boston. So this is a character from the Ennett House plotline. You just get a little POV of him at a meeting where the post-meeting is all about hugs in this specific location, where Ken himself tries to refuse one of the other guys from a hug because he's like, oh, well, I don't really like hugs. And then the other guy gets mad because, oh, do you think that I like hugs just because I'm giving people hugs because this is what we do here? And that's, you know, a whole scene that was pretty entertaining. It was seemingly pretty irrelevant to me at the time that I read it, but it was a decently entertaining and amusing and kind of funny segment at the same time, so I don't really hold anything against it for that. Then there was also extended discussion within chapter 25 between, I think, Gately and Joelle. Like I said from the last chapter, you know, some of these, like, interviews or maybe therapy type of sections, just kind of discussions going on with Gately and other people. I think this one was specifically about Joelle. getting to see interesting dynamics of some of these Ennet House characters, how they interact with each other, how some people think differently, even being within similar situations that put them into Ennet House in the first place. Some of this dynamic I wasn't really expecting to see, so that was enjoyable in there. And then we also had another section in chapter 25 that was a JO flashback sequence, much like several chapters earlier in the book. This time was ramblings about bed frames and irritability and the way that James Oren's father just kind of goes crazy at night because of squeaky bed frames. It was another instance of a fever dream, what did I just read type of moment, much like the other flashback sequence that I'm not sure how relevant it is. Some of this material about James's past that kind of goes into those flashback sequences, I haven't really understood the point of them at all, to be honest. Maybe there's a purpose to them, but if there is, I certainly do not know what it is myself. But either way, that is, most of the major, important, notable stuff that occurred in chapter 25. Chapter 26 had a little bit more that I'm going to go ahead and note down here because it was an 80-page chapter, so there was a lot to go on here. But let's talk about a short scene. There are a couple different short POV scenes of Oren within this chapter. I don't remember all of them, but one of the ones that I noted was a short scene of Oren intercoursing with, I think, Helen Steepley, the same character that he's been interacting with in some way, shape, or form for much of the book, or at least like implicitly. The hints laid here make me think that that is the character that he is interacting with in the scene. I'm not 100% certain, but I feel like that's just kind of what's being implied here. Then the door is knocked on by a guy in a wheelchair. So, the wheelchair brigade, the AFR that has been following him around, as we learned from all the phone calls that I talked about in the last one of these diaries, phone calls between Oren and Hal that are just fantastic, one of the best parts of the book. This wheelchair dude in the door of this hotel where Oren is at is supposedly, ostensibly here for a survey. I'm hoping we get a good conclusion to this sort of stalking plotline that we're seeing with Oren and the AFR, the people in the wheelchairs, because it's not really led to anything super crazy yet. But I would assume that there's got to be something important going on here between, I'm pretty sure it's Helen Steepley and Oren and the AFR. Like, all of this is just kind of centralized to multiple other plot lines that I feel like it's got to have something big going for it one of these days. So we'll see if that ever happens. There was also a scene from some kid named Idris, and then Pemulus also as a character, that was a little weird. They were utilizing blindfolds to help enhance some of these students hearing a little bit, so that was an interesting concept that was introduced. No idea at all anything of what was being discussed here. It all just kind of flew over my head. It was just kind of goofy, but that was a scene that happened in the book. I'll probably forget about it as soon as this video's done and uploaded, unless it becomes relevant again at some point, unlike, say, an earlier scene from the ETA of the way that the kids get out of doing the drug tests or are able to cheat the drug tests. That was a memorable scene that is kind of relevant to the thematic drug related ideas of the book. But I digress. There were a couple other sections of the book as well that I can't even really tell you about because they genuinely just flew over my head. It's short scenes that I don't even know what this is. I don't know what surface this or what service this does to the story. That happens several times in this chapter, being a lot of why I feel like the chapter ran over long. Finally, there was also another short scene of Mario again taking walks around ETA. Specifically, one night he takes a walk and witnesses, sees a little out of Ennet House, stuff that happens just before curfew and just before a big commotion occurs. And the big commotion is a lot of what chapter 26 is about, the lead up to it and what actually happens in it, because most of the chapter up to this point has actually been following the introduction to Randy Lenz as a new character at Ennet House. This is basically the main thing that has happened throughout the chapter. You get introduced to a character named Randy Lenz, a recent entry at Ennet House who still uses drugs and also, cheats the drug tests. He's also very particular about the way that he does things, seemingly in a sort of OCD kind of way. I think he describes himself as OCD, if I'm not mistaken. That actually just, popped a memory in my brain. This includes his methods for walking back to the Ennett house after AA meetings elsewhere in Boston. This scene, this section, I guess, that these moments with Randy Lenz also had some of the most visceral material about proclivity towards violence in the entire book. Some of it caught me off guard and made me feel really, really weird. Not gonna lie, I've read worse stuff, I've read more violent stuff, but this material specifically just kind of made me feel really strange, genuinely, like, all things considered. I don't know why, but it just kind of did. We're told about the fact that Randy Lenz likes to suffocate cats and beat cats in alleyways. Then he progresses to cutting cats and also dogs and other crazy psychopathic behavior on his walks back to Ennett House. Things that he does is like a way to release energy or anger or whatever it is. Creepy psychopathic behavior. Either way, you know, that's just kind of how things go. We also get a little bit more insight throughout these portions of the book on Bruce Green, a character who's like been mentioned a couple times, had a very short scene, and I don't know, I might have mentioned it in the first one of these Infinite Jest diaries. Green walks back to Ennett House with Lenz sometimes. Lenz talks like a maniac as a rule during these sections. On one of these walks, though, ends with Green witnessing a scene of Lenz's violence. Green gets separated from Lenz, but then manages to relocate him and sees Lenz murder a dog that belongs to some Canadians at a party who happen to witness the aftermath of this blatant killing, and they make chase on Randy Lenz. So that's an interesting aspect to the book. That's something that happens before switching to another Gately POV, which is probably the best part of the book, I think, or not the best part of the book, best part of this chapter. It wasn't all great given the repetitiveness of some of the duties that Gately describes here, but we get some insight into what Gately actually does at Ennett House, the duties that he has here. It is a lot of material, and none of it really matters all that much, and some of it is pretty tense and like sort of the wrong way in my opinion, because it's kind of dumb, like the way that curfew works with the streets and parking and Ennett House, and the way that people have to be back at Ennett House so that Gately can lock the doors at 11:30, but then he also has to unlock the doors at midnight so that everybody who has a car parked on the street can go and park the car on the other side of the street, because of the way that this portion of Boston like has, you know, rules associated with where cars park. Like, this whole section was like weird and really long and kind of dumb. Like it just made me tense and anxious for little to no reason at all, in my opinion. So it was a little bit goofy on that front. But then, you know, this was something that was going on, but because I hinted that there was a big commotion that happens here at Ennett House, this is where things kind of start. We get to see Lenz return for curfew just on time. Gately is pretty certain he's high because of the way he's acting. But then we see Bruce come back. He's basically in a catatonic state after witnessing what Lenz did to that dog. Bruce comes back a little bit late, so Gately has to let him back in, decides to do a spot piss test on him to, you know, make sure that Bruce isn't high. Then at midnight, it's time for the parking switcheroo garbage. This whole thing ends with Lenz as part of this, because Lenz owns a vehicle, which is, you know, specified earlier when his character's introduced. So at least that foreshadowing was in there. Lenz has one of these cards, ends up as, you know, one of the people having to go out and do this whole parking charade. But because he has to go out and do this thing with the whole parking charade, well, he ends up right in the clutches of the Canadians, and a kind of brawl happens right outside of Ennett House here. Gately sort of protects Lenz a little bit. Injuries and deaths happen abound between the Canadians, and Gately is really severely injured, refuses to have the cops or the ambulance called or anything like that. So it's a whole chaotic mess is basically what happens here. The best action scene of the book so far, which is kind of a weird thing to say because it might be the only action scene in the book so far, but it was fun to have a character introduced and then have so much go down as a result of what that character does, even if I feel like it was a little bit much. And then we also get the fact that when Gately is injured and Joel happens to be around and, you know, helping him get taken care of, Gately finally pieces together the fact that Joel is Madame Psychosis at the end. So that is an interesting thing that I can be reasonably certain is going to pop up in the last third of this book. I just continue to think about the fact that I have only 2 chapters left, but it's like 400 pages left of reading. It's so disheartening in its own kind of messed up way. But yeah, that was something that happened, and something that also happened in my reading over the last month. I don't remember which chapter it was. It might have been chapter 25. I also had a deja vu moment with Infinite Jest related to The Terminal Man by Michael Crichton. So that was a fun thing that happened. If you want more information on that, you can watch my review for The Terminal Man to get a little bit of explanation. Basically, both of them have like very specific like studies of sorts mentioned with different like creatures that are involved with the study listed in more or less the same way that ends up, you know, tying the books together. And I happened to read that section of here within Infinite Jest, and then also the Terminal Man, which has a section basically identical to it, like within a couple days of each other. You know, the coincidence of that was just really hilarious for me. But that was basically the events of what happened in my reading over the month. But the theory of what I think is going on here, well, this is a little bit more crackhead energy, like I kind of hinted at before in this video. So my guess is that we're going to get some plot lines converging here very soon. I know this was something that I talked about, hoped about last time around. I'm hoping that this actually happens this time. But part of why I think that this is going to happen a little bit bigger now is specifically because of Mario seeing Ennet House and some other stuff before the chaos unfolds. I feel like the way that his little POV within chapter 26 ended, that he may have witnessed part of the violence. It's not on the page, it's not confirmed. This is just a random idea, hypothesis that I have, but I get the feeling that he might have witnessed it, because it probably happened not too long after he left, because he kind of was walking away as curfew stuff was happening. So like maybe he witnessed it, maybe he didn't. Either way, I'm probably totally off base here, but maybe he even somehow recognizes Joel if he happened to witness any of the chaos going down the same way that kind of Gately did. Again, this is crackhead energy. I would be kind of surprised if this were the case, but it would also be interesting if this were the case. It's just the only idea I have for how some of these characters end up, you know, relating to each other a little bit later in the book. Like I said, could totally be wrong. Also, I mentioned in the last diary that I feel like Mario and Joel kind of probably get together in some way, shape, or form for film related stuff, because of Joel being part of Mario's father's film career, and Mario being an avid film person these days. Like I feel like there's got to be something there. So I think for some reason that like maybe this is a sort of catalyst for it if Mario happens to be around, which again, like I said, probably totally wrong, but that's kind of a guess that I have. Also, on the Meredith and Steepley side of thing, it seems to be coming a little bit closer to being done over there, based off of, you know, the April 30th, May 1st type of section where they're conversing and talking about different things. Given how little time jumping has occurred in the last several chapters of the book in general as well, aside from, you know, jumping from Meredith and Steepley stuff every once in a while to modern day stuff with what's happening at Ennet House and ETA, I do think that the next couple of chapters are going to be largely consolidated to just being like a string of events, basically more or less linear, which, again, maybe I'm wrong there, but I feel like that's probably what's kind of going on here. The timing should be fairly linear in that case, if that's what's happening, but bounding between different POVs and stories within that timeline. So I don't know how crazy things are going to get. Maybe things will get really crazy because of how big these chapters are. Maybe they'll be a little bit more simply structured. Either way, I hope to see some of the early stuff come back to some degree, because some of my favorite moments from the book were from those first like 10, 12 chapters. So I am looking forward to seeing how some of these plot lines maybe come back to some way, because if they just kind of exist early in the book for literally no reason, I'll be a bit disappointed by that, even if I loved those scenes on their own. We might see some stuff with Gately and Joel going down, and Hal and Mario, you know, these groups, these pairs of characters coming together for some reason. Maybe Ennet House and ETA don't converge in plot lines in any way, shape, or form, but they seem too close to each other, both geography, you know, in terms of the geography of the setting, and also within the way that the book is told, for them not to converge for some reason. That's just kind of a guess that I have too. But yeah, like I said, I was a little bit more mixed on my reading this month than the last couple. Not that I'm thinking it's bad, but I wasn't as engaged or as hooked or as super into a lot of the events that happened within my reading over June. So here's hoping that these last couple chapters that I read over the next couple of months bring things together a little bit, and are able to bring my the highs of those early chapters a little bit back. Because yeah, I really loved the first few hundred pages of this book. Had a ton of stuff that I loved, and there is some stuff that I loved in the reading from this month as well, but I'm definitely not as high on it this time around as I feel like I was last diary. So that's just kind of the way things are going. If you have any ideas that you are able to give me based off of my theories, or if you're somewhere around the same part of the story as me and you have your own ideas for how things might come together, definitely shout those in the comments below. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye for this video, as it's getting a little long and I have to get it edited tonight before I go to work early in the morning tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and take off. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you stick around for the next one of these diaries for the next chapter. Like I said, it is only going to be of chapter 27, so about 190 pages of the book, not counting endnotes. So that'll be something that I read over the course of this month. Thank you for watching. I'll be back in the next video on the channel, whatever that may be.